Hi there. Another book in the series on military aviation, and it's a book written by Max Hastings. And Max Hastings is known for what is sometimes called popular histories, and I think that might be a little bit of a derogatory term, because he does write histories and they are very popular, but they are very, very well researched histories, and they're very written. And along with Anthony Beevor and James Holland, he's kind of cornered the market in this area. So his book on Bomber Command, which came out a few years ago, is a really in-depth look. And I think we tend to look at Bomber Command through the prism of the later years of the war, when technology and tactics had been developed to a very, very astounding level. The development during the war was amazing. The RAF had biplanes at the beginning of World War II, still had some biplanes, and at the end had jets. And other areas were similarly rapidly developed. Really, at the start of World War II, the RAF was an amateur organisation. What experience they had was mainly in tribal conflicts in the empire, and they had no experience of attacking a defended target. So their tactics were based on theory, and in fact, in the late 20s, early 30s, the plans were really to attack France. They were seen as the potential enemy. So when the war started and the idea of attacking Germany from the air was decided, the idea was precision bombing of targets, and these had to be military targets. Even industrial targets that were producing aircraft and tanks weren't allowed to be attacked. A senior civil servant from the Air Ministry was outraged and said those buildings are private property. Shades of Sir Humphrey, really. So some of the early raids were carried out in daylight, and the object was precision attacks on specific targets. And one of the initial targets was warships at Wilhelmshaven, and they missed every target and took terrible losses. So it was quickly realized that the daylight attacks, which were needed to achieve the precision, were suicidal. So they started attacking at night, still using precision. And that at the early days was the method used. Now, Max Hastings goes on to discuss the aircraft used, and many of the aircraft that Bomber Command had were very, very poor designs. The Fairey Battle, for example, was underpowered and undefended aircraft. The Blenheim, Bristol Blenheim, had a strange defensive armament. It had a rear gunner with a single machine gun. It had a front-facing machine gun under the fuselage in a fixed position, and it had a rear-facing machine gun in a nacelle on the starboard engine. And somehow this was supposed to defeat fighter aircraft. They did some tests or some exercises with Bomber Command and Fighter Command, and Fighter Command's report was they annihilated Bomber Command. But Bomber Command just didn't refuse to accept this, and thought that these bombers could fight off German fighter attacks. There were other aircraft that were decent designs, such as the Wellington, a good medium bomber. And another thing, really, the bomb loads were really, the RAF overestimated the effects of the rather puny bomb loads as well. So they switched to night flying, and because they couldn't hit the targets in daylight, so they started flying at night, and that's hardly going to increase your accuracy, but the hope was they would decrease their losses. And they quickly found out that precision bombing at night was also not really effective at all. And there was a report called the Butt report by a civil servant, Mr. Butt, and he found out that, firstly, only out of any given raid, only 2/3 of the aircraft in general reached the target. A third tended to turn back before getting to the target area. So out of those aircraft, only 1/3 dropped their bombs within 5 miles of the target. That was the degree of precision. So there was a rethink, and this became the strategy of area bombing. They were no longer trying to hit precise targets. They were just bombing German cities, basically setting fire to buildings and killing the workforce. That was it in a nutshell, but this was never publicly admitted. And in fact, Max Hastings quotes some of the parliamentary debates, and the way the Air Minister squirmed to use language to avoid admitting that we were carrying out area bombing. So without actually lying, they would invoke secrecy and other things and obscure the fact, but it was never admitted. So the book then goes on to discuss the other side of the coin, the German defences. Now, the Germans had a big advantage in that when they were attacking the British cities, they came in over the Channel, and the RAF could intercept them either over the Channel, over the coast, over the Thames estuary, or over the target. Going the other way, Bomber Command had to go across the Channel, then right across either France, Belgium, or Holland generally, to get to Germany, to the targets in Germany. And so there were belts of defences on the coast, inland, and then really intensively around the German cities, particularly the Ruhr cities, the industrial production, and also Berlin. And these defences were very effective. They had really good anti-aircraft guns, the flak 88mm guns, which could reach the bomber stream very effectively, could destroy even a heavy bomber with one hit. And the German night fighters that were directed by radar, and also they adopted what was called the Wildsau tactic, where they would roam looking for targets of opportunity. And together the flak and the night fighters were very, very effective. And later in the war, the Germans developed different ways of attacking, and they came out, they had a Me-110 aircraft fitted with a slanting upward cannon, which was called Schrager music, and so they could attack the aircraft from below, and it was tremendously effective. So obviously a discussion of Bomber Command involves discussing Arthur Harris, who was in charge of Bomber Command for most of the war. Now, he inherited the area bombing strategy, but he enthusiastically embraced it to the point of obsession. He saw the destruction of German cities as the way of winning the war, and he thought the main enemy was the Admiralty, and he was very scathing in his attacks on the Admiralty because he wanted their budget. And anything else, the Americans, when they came into the war, started attacking the German oil production targets and also the ball bearing factories. And most historians agree if that strategy had been continued, it would have been a very, very significant blow to the German economy. The destruction to the cities was the single-minded focus of Harris. The dams raid, for example, was a panacea, and he called it tripe, even though when it was a success he basked in the glory. Even D-Day was a panacea, and he vehemently opposed the use of Bomber Command being diverted to support the landings of D-Day, which was the way that World War II was going to be won. He opposed the Pathfinders, creation of the Pathfinders, which accurately marked the targets. And when he was overruled and the Pathfinder Force was created, he insisted that their tours were much longer than a regular bombing tour, as a punishment to them. Another interesting section of the book concerns the scientific developments. As I've said, the science really came on in leaps and bounds during the war. One of them was the radar deflecting technique, which was codenamed Window, which was dropping precisely cut lengths of foil, which would simulate on a radar return, simulate a mass air attack. The scientists developed it, but higher ups in the RAF, Bomber Command wanted to use it, but higher ups in the RAF said, no. If the Germans find this stuff on the ground, they'll realise what it is and they'll use it against us. In the event, after a delay, Window was used in a major raid, and sure enough, the Germans found that the smoking rooms of the city were decorated with tin foil, but knew what it was because they had also developed it, and they'd been told not to use it for exactly the same reason, that the RAF might start using it against them. And another interesting scientific war was the German fighters were directed to the targets by voice command, radio command, and the RAF could get in on the frequency, and they had German speakers who would spoof the pilots and give them incorrect headings. When the Germans realized this was being done, they changed to a musical coding. They used bits of music for coding, and the RAF went away and managed to replicate this. So it was an ongoing tit for tat war all the way through. One of the very, very interesting parts of the book, and there's a very human side to the book. Max Hastings gets across the human cost and the lives of the bomber crews in the various squadrons in a very, very significant way. And he does a complete day in the life of a bomber crew, from the time they get up, the briefings, test flights, and the mission and the return and the debriefing and so on. And it's really good. And in particular, the role of the rear gunner, who was isolated at the back of the aircraft and usually in freezing conditions, peering out for many hours. It was 8 hours, the trips, and looking for any signs of anything out there, and he might see something, and it might actually be another bomber from the bomb stream. It could be the moon on clouds creating shadows. It could be a drop of oil on the windscreen. He's looking at, what is it? Or it could be a German night fighter out there. And the problem was that the British bombers were equipped with .303 machine guns, which is a rifle caliber. It was armor piercing and incendiary mix, but the German night fighters had cannon, and this had the superior range, and it was also explosive. So the night fighter threat was tremendously real, and the job of the rear gunner, that relenting situational awareness, was very taxing. So another really vital part of the book, and it's interspersed throughout the book, is he deals with fear, and some of Lord Moran gave classifications of fear, which are quite interesting, and all those were demonstrated. Some people didn't seem to show fear. Other people froze on the first operational mission, froze on the controls of the gun or the radio, and could never fly again. Other people flew many missions and then had symptoms of fear. It's not in this book, but it's in his more recent book on the Dams raid, Chastised, where Guy Gibson has flown a raid over Berlin and comes home, and he had a girlfriend, a platonic girlfriend, and he goes to her house, and he's in his car, he beeps the horn, and she comes out, and she gets in the car, and he's shaking, and he says, "Just hold me." This is before the Dams raid. He went on to win a Victoria Cross. He was taken off operations because he was so famous, but volunteered to go back on operations and was killed. So he obviously felt fear, but was able to dominate it. His sense of duty was enormous, and there are many cases like that. Max Hastings talks about some of the personalities, like Leonard Cheshire, who was a fantastic Air Force leader, leading a squadron. He led the 617 after Guy Gibson, and he was another Victoria Cross winner, and just a tremendous warrior, really, but a very human one. Anyway, Harris was a controversial figure, and later on in the war, particularly after Dresden, he kind of fell out of favour. I mean, he said such things as he wouldn't give all the remaining German cities weren't worth the bones of a single British grenadier. So he was quite implacable in wanting to destroy Germany, really. And later in, as I say, the area bombing was never admitted, and it became something of an embarrassment. And Bomber Command was never given a campaign medal, which, in my opinion, is a terrible slight for people who were suffering terrible losses and demonstrating amazing courage. And early in the war, they were rarely the only means of prosecuting operations against Germany. in the main. They were tremendous morale boost, and even though the government and the civil servants and the Air Force would never admit to area bombing, the people of this country would have supported it had they known that was the policy. Particularly the people who lived in the areas that had been bombed, like Liverpool. I certainly know my family completely supported the destruction of the German cities. So the book really covers all this and much more. There's lots of the human stories and also the politics, the strategy, the infighting, the stories of people who are the victims of bombing, the casualties, and what it was like. And he really takes you inside Bomber Command in a way that I don't think it's been fully done before. So it's certainly a book. It's a bit controversial with some people, particularly about Harris, but I think it's pretty fair, and he can certainly defend his arguments, and does so in the book very thoroughly. So it's a book I do recommend.